This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia Podcast, the podcast that deals with the dark feminine. I'm your host, Breach Burke. Now, today, first of all, Happy New Year, because I'm recording this at the beginning of January of 2023. And this is the last entry in the series that I have on the Navadurgas. Okay? We've been through all, the previous 8 we've been through, and now we are up to the 9th and the final Navadurga, because Nava is 9, who is known as Siddhidhatri. Now, Siddhi has to do with power or with knowledge or with attainment of some kind, and Dhatri has to do with one who gives. So Siddhidhatri is the one who gives some kind of power or knowledge. And typically what she gives is actually known, of course, as Siddhi, which is power. And there are traditionally 8 Siddhis. There's more than 8 in other traditions. Some list 18, some list 15, depending on the tradition you're coming from. Buddhism has its own inflection on that, and there are different Hindu texts that have other inflections as well. But for the purpose of this, we're going to talk about the Siddhidhatri, who she is, where she comes from, what her background story is, and her connection to the Siddhis, which is which again are these sort of powers that are bestowed. They're powers that are actually bestowed upon the gods, but within Tantric practice, they are also powers that that practitioners, Siddhas, could potentially gain themselves. So we will talk about all of that. Where I'd like to start, as usual, with when I start talking about a particular Devi or deity of some kind, is with their form and their description. So her iconography. She's depicted with 4 hands, holding a chakra, which is a discus, so it's like a wheel, because chakra literally means wheel, a shank or a conch shell, a mace, and a lotus. Okay, she's either seated on a fully bloomed lotus or on a lion. Okay, so the lion is more oriented towards Durga, towards her more ferocious aspect of that, and of course the lotus would have to do with that, that bliss or that peace of mind that is that's outside of mind. Okay. And it says, in some pictorial depictions, she's flanked by Gandharvas, Yakshas, Siddhas, Asuras, and Devas, all of who are portrayed as portraying obeisance to the goddess. Okay. Now, there's several interesting things there right off. Probably telling the legend of her creation story will help give some context for that. So the legend, and I'm just going to be reading the very simplified version of this legend. It says, around the time when the universe was just a massive void, completely full of darkness, there were no indications of the world anywhere. Okay, we've heard this in creation mythology, the idea of the void. But then a ray of divine light, which is ever existing, spread everywhere, illuminating each and every nook of the void. The sea of light was formless. Suddenly, it started to take a definite size and finally looked like a divine lady who was none other than the goddess Shakti herself. Now, as we've talked about many times, Shakti, of course, is that supreme primal power of consciousness within the universe. So this light is this bringing out of the void, bringing this form in. The supreme goddess came forth and gave birth to the trinity of gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, also known as the Tridevas. She advised the 3 lords to contemplate, to understand their roles in performing their duties for the world. Acting on the words of goddess Shakti, the Trimurti sat behind the bank of an ocean and performed penances for many years. The pleased goddess appeared before them in the form of Siddhidhatri. She bestowed upon them wives. She created Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Parvati, giving them to Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, respectively. Goddess Siddhidhatri entrusted Brahma to take up the role as the creator of worlds, Vishnu with the role of preserving the creation and its creatures, and Shiva with the role of destroying the world when it is time. Which is, the traditional, creation, preservation, and destruction. She tells them that their powers are in the form of their respective wives, who will help them perform their tasks. Okay, so there you go. The power of these gods comes through their wives, who are their Shaktis. Okay, so that's interesting thing to note here, that their power comes through the feminine. The goddess assured them that she will also provide to them divine miraculous powers, which will also help them carry out their duties. Now again, notice that this comes from the female. Okay. Saying this, she bestowed to them 8 supernatural powers, which were named Anima, Mahima, Garima, Lagima, Prepti, Prakambya, Ashitva, and Vashitva. Okay. And we're going to talk about what each one of those means and its importance. So apart from the 8 supreme siddhis that the goddess Siddhidhatri had granted to the Trimurti, she is believed to have granted them 9 treasures and 10 other kinds of supernatural powers or potentialities. There's the 2 parts, man and woman, created devas and devis, daityas, danavas, asuras, gandharvas, yakshas, apsaras, bhutas, heavenly beings, mythical creatures, plants, aquatic, terrestrial, and aerial animals, nagas, which are serpents, and garudas, etc., and garudas are birds, and many more species of the world were born and thus originated from them. The creation of the entire world now fully complete, full of innumerable stars, galaxies, as well as constellations. Solar system was complete with the 9 planets. Now, of course, the 9 planets in Hindu scripture are a little bit different. On Earth, firm landmass was created, surrounded by such vast oceans, lakes, streams, rivers, and other bodies of water. All types of flora and fauna originated and were given their proper habitations. The 14 worlds were created and constructed all together, giving the above-mentioned creatures places of residence to stay in, all which they called home. Okay. Now, okay, so what we take away from here is that creation here in this particular version, we had talked about, Skandamata, and we had talked about some of the other Navadurgas as being, those who bring about the creation. But this one, here's another version where we are looking at Shakti as literally just the creator of all form. And this, and as we can see, this, she even creates the gods, who we think of as being the gods who are over the world, or the ones that are in charge of, the maintenance, creation and maintenance of the universe, and of course its eventual destruction. Within that kind of story, it's very simple. It's very easy to see that Lakshmi, as the spouse of Vishnu, okay, because she's there, provider of abundance and prosperity, and she is considered to be one of the most mild-mannered of the goddesses, because it is about, it's about preserving society and the abundance of life as it is. Saraswati, with Brahma, okay, and of course Saraswati has to do with intellect and learning and these kinds of things, and so she's a proper match for Brahma, okay, for the kinds of thing that he does in terms of creating things. And then, of course, we have Shiva, we have Parvati, who we know takes the form of Kali and many of the other dark goddesses, which you would see it has to do with her role in destruction. Now, we're seeing all of these different Navadurgas, all of their forms are forms of this kind of Shakti, and the female Devis, the goddesses themselves, the Mahadevis, are all also, they are the supreme powers of the universe. Now, Siddhidhatri has another significance. Those who are following my Patreon, I did a special podcast last year on Sri Ardhanariswara. And this is about a merged form of Shiva and Shakti, where it's half male, half female. And Sri Ardhanariswara, the left side of Ardhanariswara, is supposed to be Siddhidhatri herself. And of course, the male half is Shiva. So Shiva and Siddhidhatri together make Sri Ardhanariswara, which are the kind of male and female components together in harmony in the universe, not separated from each other. Okay, so if we think about all of these things, we think about her, the things that she has. Okay, so I'm looking at the implements that she holds in her hand. So she has a chakra, or she has a wheel. Okay, so wheel has to do a lot with time, the way that the universe seems to operate on this measured, at least in our perception, the way in which the wheel spins. But of course, because it's a wheel, it's not a linear progression. You're not moving from point A to point Z or whatever in a straight line. It's a continual cycle of life and death. Okay, so she's got the chakra that represents that. She has the shankha, which is the the conch shell, and anybody who attends puja knows that the conch shell is often blown. It makes a very loud sound. I think of it as almost being like a flute or a horn or something like that. It makes a very loud sound when you blow into the conch, if you know how to do it. I've never been really good at doing the conch shell thing, but I know some women who are really, really good at, who go to puja, and they really know how to bring the sound out. But of course, sound is another factor in the creation of the world, in the whole essence of the universe. The idea of mantra. As much as I'm not a fan of Plato, he talks about the idea of the harmony of the spheres and things like that. There's this idea that there's a fundamental sound. When we talk about the Om, for example, that this is the complete sound that is kind of the vibration of the universe. We talk about the frequencies. So the idea of this very sacred sound as being associated with her and being associated with creation. Now the mace is of course a weapon, and so this has to do with the conflict or subduing or struggle or things like that. So you have the mace to potentially, and it also can be a symbol of power as well, depending on how you're looking at it or how it's being used. There's this idea of control and authority that goes along with the mace. And of course the lotus would have to do with that peacefulness, that comes from being in the center, not struggling. It is said that the universe, there's a lotus that grows out of the navel of a sleeping Vishnu, and out of this lotus opens up, and Brahma comes out, and and there's a world that's created every time that happens. And then eventually the lotus closes up, and then it goes away, and another universe comes back, and so on and so forth. So we have this kind of view of the world, and we have this view of Shakti as representing these kinds of elements that form creation. Now, the Siddhis themselves, let me talk a little bit about that. Also, I wanted to mention that Siddhidhatri is associated with one of the grahas, as I was mentioning, there are 9 planets. In the traditional system, they don't have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They have, it's Mercury, Venus, Earth. Although typically when you're talking astrologically, you're talking about the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, and Saturn. And then also the north and south nodes of the moon, which are known as Rahu, Ketu, respectively. Now, Siddhidhatri is associated with Ketu. And anybody who performs astrology knows that Ketu has to do, that's the tail of the dragon. The idea is that Ketu, Rahu Ketu is this kind of dragon or Ashura that ends up getting cut in half. And so the head is in one place. So Rahu tends to be associated with the grandiose things that we do with the mind, whereas Ketu is the tail. That's what's behind you. It has no head, so it's blind. But it tends to have more to do with the things that, lessons from the past or past life kind of stuff astrologically. Like Ketu has to do with where you're coming from. And it also is sort of the mechanism that ends up being a key to liberation as well. So we see Siddhidhatri being associated with Ketu in terms of the grahas or the planets. So we've talked about the different things. I want to talk about the 8 Siddhis. Okay, and these are all mentioned in the Sri Devi Khadgamala Stotra as well. They are anima, the power to reduce to the size of an atom or a crumb, something very, very small. So it's the power to shrink, as it were. Okay. Mahima, which is just the opposite, the power to become really big, to become enormous in size. And I'm reading this one site that gives an example of how Lord Hanuman uses both of these powers. Hanuman's the monkey god within Hinduism. and he had reduced himself to a minuscule version to search for Sita on the island of Lanka. And in Mahima, Lord Hanuman becomes a gigantic version of himself to burn down the island of Lanka. Okay. So, and in Lord Vishnu's Vamana avatar, with 3 steps, he was able to cover the 3 worlds. So this is about becoming very small or very big. Okay. And then similarly, we then have the next 2, which are Garima and Lagima, which is the power first, Garima, to become very, very heavy, and Lagima, the power to become very, very light. Okay. Now you have Prapti, which is the power to acquire anything at will at any time. Prakambya, which is the power to do anything you desire by flying or, from flying to walking on water. Okay, so basically, it's the power to manifest anything that you want. Ishitva is the power over all the elements of creation. And Vashitva is the power to control all the natural forces and power over life and death. Okay, so what are we looking at with these siddhis? We are looking at things that allow you to manifest, basically. These are, so it's not surprising that these are considered to be magical powers. These are the powers that the gods have, okay, that are granted to them. They're granted by Siddhidhatri, okay? She's the giver of the siddhi, right? And so the idea is that through this, we can manifest anything that we wish to. Some people say that Prapti is also the power of omnipresence, the ability to be everywhere at all times. And, so siddhis are, they are considered to be the powers of the gods, but they're also oftentimes sought after by not only humans, but by some of these other beings that are mentioned in the, in the different Hindu scriptures and in the epics. And in particular, I think about the way that siddhis are used by the Asuras, okay, who are what we tend to call the demonic forces. And as I've said ad nauseum, they're what the Hindus think of as demonic is not the same as what we think of as demonic in the West. I mean, there is the sense that they are earthbound, or they have to do with earth. But Asuras in Hinduism have to do with being focused exclusively on material world and the goods and the luxuries of the material world. And among those things would be power. So as we have mentioned, a lot of times you'll see Asuras that will perform these penances or austerities to a particular deity. And then the deity will eventually grant them a boon. And a boon usually comes in the form of some kind of siddhi. Okay. And, But therein lies the potential problem of the siddhi, in that it's something that you can, this is something that the gods have. And it's obvious when you look at what's involved, that you have this, the power, the power to become big or small, the power to become heavy or light. I mean, this is about, it's almost like shape-shifting. It's almost about being able to move forms or move through things, or to manifest, or to, to make invisible, or, there's all of these kinds of things that go with it. And also, in a sense, this is also the power to transcend what we would think of as the laws of physics. And at the same time, there's also the general idea of having power over creation or power over the worlds, which frequently you will see in the different, Hindu texts, the Devi, Mahatmaya, and other places. You will see that it's the that the Asuras, that this is what they want. Usually the gods end up having to, or the Shaktis have to start doing battle with the Asuras because they have gained some kind of siddhi. Okay, and it's usually a siddhi of power. They want to be granted this power over all of the worlds, or power over others. And, and as we know, that will to power is something that can be very corrupting. It's where it becomes all about what you can control, and not about going with the flow of life as it is, which is why it's considered to be very dangerous to request siddhi. Because as you might imagine, magical practitioners who use this kind of thing within Tantra, that siddhis are, siddhis can be attained, but the way to attaining them is within the texts, and it's a very veiled reference to how this is attained. And for good reason, because you don't want, you don't necessarily want just everybody having this kind of siddhi, at least not in this kind of a sense. I wanted to read a little bit from this. This is from the Yogini Ashram on the siddhis themselves. So I'm going to read a little bit of this to you. It says, the mysterious powers or siddhis attained through the practices of Kriya Tantra Yoga result from a mastery of the elemental principles and are rightly veiled in the writings of Siddhas using a unique expression of intentional obscurity embedded within the sacred texts. This veiled language is referred to as Sandabhasa. The arcane expression is justified not only because those who wield the sword of power can themselves be cut by it, but also because such powers can be abused. The sacred text should inform the practices given by a living master. Yes, and that's just it. You can engage in these kinds of practices, or you can attain to these kinds of things, but it should always be done. Any of these practices really need to be done under the auspices of a guru. When you try to do them kind of on your own in this kind of self-help kind of a way, or just by reading a book, or it's the same thing I've said about trying to activate Kundalini and other things. You don't want to do this without, you need an experienced master to be helping you work through this process. Otherwise, you stand to be able to do a lot of damage to yourself and to other people. Okay. As he says here, they say here, a book, regardless of its sanctity, cannot be a guru. The great ones await those souls who have purified their motives, energy, and consciousness through the principal practices of Kriya, Tantra, and Yoga, though it may have many different names and forms depending on the needs of aspiring souls. Individuals immersed in blindness of illusion themselves can and often do misguide those who do not develop discrimination, but none will deceive the Siddhas. Practitioners of yoga release 1/4 of their sadhana Shakti to those who seek it through them. Siddhas know exactly to whom their Shakti should go. They can see purity as easily as others see the earth. To become a fit instrument, the internal electricities must purify the being and the ego dissolve to the deeper cosmic self. The demonic ego energies, the Asuras, cannot capture the spiritual nectar or the Soma, nor will they ever. Sincere souls should never fear. Even in states of relative weakness and ignorance, with layers of maya, or illusion, sincere souls are nonetheless protected by the strength of the peerless masters and the pursuit of truth over falsehood. The antidote for all fear is love. Okay. So again, to me, I don't, I'm not a big fan of the term purity, but I think what's being said here is the way in which the electrical impulses in the body, the way that the Shakti that we have within our own bodies is used, it needs to be used properly. It needs to not be blocked in certain places. It needs to be freely flowing, and and because when it is freely flowing, you automatically have that kind of consciousness. They mention here a classic text in yoga, Shiva Swarodaya states, creation takes place out of 5 elements, and it also dissolves in the elements. The 5 elements are the supreme Brahman alone, and it is beyond the elements. One who truly knows the 5 elemental universe, which is made up of water, fire, wind, earth, and ether, is respected and worshipped everywhere. So they say there's much mystery surrounding the elemental energies. The Siddhas discover that knowledge of hidden forces of nature, nominally translated as elements, will lead to true wisdom, which is jnana, liberation or mukti, undreamed of powers or siddhis, and ultimately a complete mastery and freedom from rebirth itself, or jiva samadhi. The nature of these elements is distinctly different than those that we might study in a chemistry class, for these elements are the fundamental principles of light and electricity engaged in creative play throughout the universe. The 5 elements are found in the ancient Vedas and are foundational to miraculous powers known to Tantra and Yoga. In modern times, they remain just as important to the achievement in the spiritual path as it did in the ancient days. Okay, so they go on and they talk a little bit about, the ancient Greeks and their association with these powers and so forth. They go on to say in Yoga and Tantra, the 5 elements correlate with the 5 lower chakras. Neo-tantrics and occultist practices relating to chakras have less effect without the purification techniques used by yogis and tantrics for centuries. Long-term focus applying the proven and sound Kriya practices is needed to purify the elemental principles within the aspirant. The goal of life is realization of the innermost self, and this is reached through the comprehensive use of Hatha Yoga, mantras, Kriya Kundalini Pranayam, prescribed in Kriya practices, and the vast toolbox of tantric and yogic techniques. These most certainly include meditation or dhyanam, concentration or dharanam, and the active workings of the teacher lineage, Guru Parampara. In addition, the grace flow from the Siddhas is rightly understood as essential, as they are the quintessential masters of the bhutas. The practices of Kriya, Tantra, and Yoga are directed to expand consciousness and develop unconditional love to the point of experiencing the universal bliss vision, or Vijnana Samadhi. Okay. As the inner goddess, Kundalini Shakti, reaches a given chakra, that vortex vibrates intensely until she, the great goddess, rises up, right? Because the Shakti is seen as being like a serpent that is coiled at the base of your spine. And by the way, this is another example. When I've taught students about serpent imagery, especially in water myths and so forth, a lot of times serpent imagery in the West is interpreted as something evil or negative, associated with Samael or Satan or deception. Whereas, in fact, in Hindu culture, the Nagas or the serpents, and this particular serpent, this form of Shakti, is considered to be it is in fact the source of life and of rebirth and of things like that. So it is hardly a negative symbol at all. It says, her departure from the given center in her upwards climb results in a profound sense of void at the point of her departure, a void which ultimately morphs into pure awareness at that center. It is as if the purification has increased the vibration of that center to the level of attunement to the cosmic nature principle, or prakriti, and that becomes reabsorbed in the vast fabric of universal consciousness, at least for the time span that she remains above it. In due course, we discover that Prakriti Devi can both transcend and be established permanently in each of these centers. She ascends to the consciousness of the godhood, which would be up towards the Atya and towards the Sahasrara, which is at the top, where Shiva is, and then descends with the universal consciousness into the lower planes. The nature of Sarupa Samadhi, or the golden body, is such that rare souls are permanently established in the relative plane, yet fully transcended as well. Inevitably, this means physical immortality, the physical light body, which is not subject to the usual rules of nature. Okay, well, obviously, we could say that is something extraordinarily rare. And so they go on here. I don't want to read this whole thing, but they go on and they talk about the different kinds of powers that can develop, the kinds of things that we think of as psychical powers, clairaudience, telepathy, and compromising intuition. And they talk about the ways in which that can happen. And, and purification of the elemental electrical energies, or Bhuta Shuddhi, is a well-known practice together with other techniques that leads to miraculous yoga tantric powers. Okay, the question would be, though, again, are you doing these practices simply to attain these powers so that you can use them and that you can control things, or are you looking to attain these powers, is this more of just, wanting to be, expand your awareness? Is this more about wanting to be, in a space where you are, say, in control of yourself, or in control of the kind of way in which you direct your own dharma or direct your own path? For me, I've always felt that Siddhis or the acquisition of Siddhis has, it becomes problematic when it becomes about trying to control the outside world or trying to control others. It's not that people can't or don't use these things for, like there's a lot of talk against the idea, for example, of people doing things to gain, doing certain rituals or working with certain elementals to try to gain prosperity, or to gain certain things. It's often assumed that somehow this is a bad thing because it's focused on something material. It doesn't have to be bad because it's focused on something material. We all need certain things to be able to survive. And as I have noted in other kinds of, other cultures and so forth, sometimes certain types of rituals that we may question the ethics of may be used if somebody, is completely powerless in society, for instance. Like, Tantra is something that is very interesting to a group of people in particular, and maybe this is part of the reason for its, the distaste for it in many Orthodox Hindu settings, is because there's a feeling that this is something of either the outcasts or the lower castes, or the people who are in poverty, people who have no status in society, that this is a way for them to gain power. And we've talked about this even within certain Afro-Brazilian traditions and so forth, where these certain very ferocious and very powerful kinds of deities that are appealed to in this very, very primal kind of a way, that this provides a power that perhaps one's social standing in a community, whoever the ruling power is, if you're the underdog in that one, you may be the one who seeks this kind of power, just to be able to have some kind of a power in the world, to be able to feel like you have, you have a voice, that you have a role, that you're not just simply, you're not just simply there to be suffered and to be tread on by other people, right? At the same time, so I don't want to make it sound like people who are attracted to Siddhis or who have, interested in these things are just people who are out to. I don't agree with the point of view that this is just people who are out to gain power for themselves or to be controlling of others. I don't, because I've seen examples where this is definitely not the case. You can have those kinds of abilities naturally. I have a few. They're really kind of more of a. To me, it would just be more if one was fully naturally in tune with their own Shakti, with their own Kundalini energy, that you could, that these things probably would arise naturally. It's not even something you have to strive to attain to. And certainly, if you're working under the auspices of a guru, these things can also come about with certain, sometimes with certain practices, and sometimes they just do on their own. They may arise naturally, depending on you and, whatever your situation, your environment, what context you're coming from. It is possible for that to happen. So, but if the whole thing is about just strictly, I want to be able to do cool stuff, or, I want to be able to get back at my enemies, or I just want to, if that's really the entire point and purpose, then that's where you can lead to these kinds of imbalances in the Shakti, which can actually end up being very destructive. Because as we can see, Shakti, she's got creative elements and she's got destructive elements. And this is really the fundamentals of the divine feminine. Because the divine feminine is about, it's not only about motherhood and creation and getting all these things, it's also about the destruction of things. And, this is where we get into the dark feminine. We get into that aspect of things that is not just about, having all the stuff we want or having everything just go along the way that we want, or having someone to rescue us or protect us, or, although to be fair, dark mothers often are protectors as well. They often have that kind of mother bear energy, that fiercely protective of what they consider to be their children. But at the same time, they also have these very, very destructive qualities, and that the fact that you have those two things that exist side to side without paradox, okay, is really part of that whole thing. It's a problem. It's not a problem. It's a problem for the Western mindset, because our mindset is so split. We're so split between the idea of what's good and what's evil. And we think of the things that are either evil or chaotic or unruly in some fashion as things that have to be kind of beaten down and tamed. And this is not that kind of a point of view. The idea is that all of these elements kind of work together in harmony, and you don't want to exclude elements. To me, trying to exclude elemental stuff, that's a bit in our culture, in the way that we try to suggest that anything of an elemental nature is either quote-unquote low magic or lesser magic, or associated with the demonic or something like that, rather than the daemonic, which is what it really should be. And it's, so I'm not one of those who's going to say that, it's wrong to acquire Siddhis. I just simply think, like anything, like any kind of thing that you would acquire, any kind of thing with any kind of force, you want to be careful with it. I remember taking a class with Lon Milo Duquette, and I probably said this story before somewhere, but he had been talking about the Goetia and the way in which people use the book of the 72 demons to gain perhaps certain powers or siddhis. And one of the things he had said, this kind of a thing is like having a like one of those big caterpillar, things, or the bulldozers, those big, heavy earth moving equipment. He's like, if you know how to drive it, you can build stuff. If you don't know how to drive it, you're probably going to destroy stuff. And I thought that was the best and simplest explanation of exactly what the problem can be with Siddhi. You're dealing with something that's extremely powerful, and if you are not prepared to work with it, you can actually do more harm than good with it. So, which is why they will recommend to you within Tantra that you do this under the auspices of a teacher of some kind, because to simply do it on your own or I read a book or I saw a YouTube video, that can be very, very problematic. Okay, so just getting back briefly to Siddhidhatri. She's, so this final form of Ma Durga, associated with Ketu, which is this sort of karmic energy that's also associated with liberation. Okay. When one is in Ketu Mahadasha, that is the period of time when one can work towards moksha, towards liberation from rebirth, from constant rebirth. So she holds the chakra of rebirth in her hand, but she also holds the lotus, and she also holds the conscious. There's also this sense of being, the maya of your separateness, of this and that, of good and bad, right and right. All this, there's a sense of all of this dissolving when you get down to the core of Shakti. So this is the Shakti that is not only the creator, who has not only brought everything into form, but also represents that which is sort of beyond form. Okay. And, and those two things are intimately connected. It's not, there's not one over here and one over here, and one's good and one is bad. All of them are intimately bound up in the processes. I mean, you see Vishnu, for example, taking avatars that can be very destructive to certain forces, but in the name of preservation, which is his duty. And Shiva, even though he is considered to be destructive, also has a very creative role as well. Shiva, Shakti, making love is part of what continues to generate and regenerate the universe. Okay, desire is something. I mean, Shiva also has burned up the god of desire in the one story about Parvati, but at the same time, Lalita Tripura Sundari comes back and restores kama, restores desire to the world, because all of these different forces, these elemental forces, and these desires to manifest and to attain and to do things, they all have a place. The question is not to let yourself get so extremely attached to that becomes your entire focus, because now you're just, now you're not, as they say, you're not seeing the forest for the trees. You're not seeing, where you fit into the big picture. You think that somehow, your mind gets in the way, and you somehow think that you are in control of things, or because you're not really aware of a lot of things, you become, motivated by your insecurities or by your own agendas. That's one of the real difficulties, actually, of finding a spiritual teacher, is trying to find somebody who does not have an agenda. It's extremely difficult to find a guru or a master who does not have some kind of an agenda. It's extremely rare, and if you can find a master like that, then you are fortunate. However, I should also caution that when I say "quote unquote" have an agenda, that would mean, in my view, what that means is, all gurus are going to have like elements. They're not saints in the Western sense. Okay. So you may hear about things like, for example, my own guru, people like to deride. They'll say, oh, well, she's supposed to be pure and virginal, but I've heard that she's done this and she's done that. And I'm like, or that, people start scrutinizing how the monies for her charities come in and get spent. And like, oh, but I see that they bought this one thing, so that must mean that they're misusing. There's always people who want to show that you are living an absolute life of this kind of moral purity that is actually very much a Western standard. It really does not, you're, and part of that is the fault of the ashrams who try to promote these gurus as being kind of like the equivalent of, or living up to the standards of saints. Not that they can't, but frequently they don't, because they may be, they may be engaged in these kind of orthodox practices, but they're also, on another level, they're also tantrics, which means that they are also immersed in the world. So they may have sexual desire. They may have, even if, they're technically unmarried, or, there may be different things that happen. And to simply say, well, that means that they're, that they're not real, or they're not true, or that they're hypocrites, isn't necessarily so. They may advise, a lot of times when they make speeches to people, they're giving sort of very, very generalized advice. What you as the individual devotee will experience with your guru could be vastly different. I have certainly found that with Amma. I mean, there's the message that her swamis put out all the time, and the different things. And actually, it's gotten to a point. I've talked to a number of devotees where we're actually really bored of hearing this because it's the same crap over and over again. And it's just, and to me, it's just, it just doesn't have it like, oh, one should always take care of the poor. One should do this. One should do that. Okay. Yeah. You're speaking very generally. It's the individual relationship that you have with the guru that, to me, that makes a lot more sense. And that is more, that's where you get to it because the guru knows what's going on with you. Okay. And the guru can, the kinds of things, somebody else might, like, I used to go to astrologers and they would say to me, oh, well, yeah, your chart shows that you can do this kind of work, but because Amma says that nobody should really do this kind of work, or very few people can, therefore you shouldn't. And I'm like, well, you're not her, and you didn't tell me. She's got to be the one to tell me, not you. And she may tell me something different because maybe I'm one of those people. You know what I mean? Like, you don't, I'm just sort of the whole thing with the guru relationship, since that is very, very important to the proper development and use of this kind of energy. But so anyway, I guess what I'm saying is that when we're judging an agenda, to me, an agenda is somebody who is, to me, like really what we authentically think of in the West as a cult leader. You may be talking about something that is somebody's, it may be literally about their narcissism and their ego. They may be very charismatic. They may be able to say things, but ultimately you're just there as a pawn in whatever kind of game that they're playing. And that's, and sometimes that's very transparent and sometimes it's not. So it's very hard, particularly in the West, to find a guru who is, it's hard to find that authenticity. So in any case, that's just a little note on that. I think that may be all I really have to say about Siddhidhatri. Certainly, this is that manifestation of Mahashakti that not only bestows all these powers, but also who has created the creators and the destroyers of the universes, and is the one who is the power behind all of that. So she is quite mysterious and quite powerful, and and people would perform puja to Siddhidhatri to be able to manifest their wishes, to sort of gain these boons. Because she's a very beneficent goddess, but of course, rolled into that are all the destructive elements as well. And so we always have to, there's always, to me in Siddhidhatri, there's that caution about the kind of power that you wield with your consciousness. That formative power in nature, which is, it's not necessarily always something, it can be something very beautiful, blissful, and beneficial. It can also be something extremely dangerous. And, and the idea here is, I think the cautionary tale there is make sure that when you go down the path of that may naturally or intentionally allow you to acquire siddhi, that you need to be very, you need to be careful about who's leading you down that path. And you need to be careful of things, of trying to, how have I heard it put recently? There's a tendency when people start working with paganism or start working with religions that are not Western monotheism, to start kind of immersing themselves, say, in rituals or devotions to a particular deity. And then, now that deity is my best friend, and, this deity talks to me in the morning and says this and that. It's not, that's probably more in your head. That's not really, because what happens with these kinds of forces is a lot more profound. Generally, it does not, what I consider to be the authentic experiences there are things that happen not in the way that you expect them to, because your mind is trained a certain way, especially if you grew up anywhere in America or Europe or, places that have been influenced by Western culture, which I hate to say is most places nowadays. But when you have that kind of mindset, you're still approaching these kind of forces with that kind of mindset. And that's, while on the one hand, you can develop discrimination about, well, what's the appropriate or inappropriate use of something. The problem with that Western mindset is that you end up, this kind of split idea makes you more about, you may be, you may not be engaging in these things for, the in the right way or for the right reasons, or you may just be, you may be trying to, engage. You may try to be engaging it in a way that could become harmful to you because you are not, you're not. If you're really seeking out that kind of an experience, the best thing is to not start by looking. You're not looking for the power, okay? You're in it because you are looking to move deeper into that space. You want that experience of being alive. You want that experience of being part of things. And those other things can arise naturally as part of that. But to say that I'm going to focus my attention just to gain these siddhis, that's exactly what the Asuras do. They are only engaging in these practices to attain power for themselves. And inevitably what we see is the Shaktis that will, come in, neutralize that effect. So, I don't know. I hope I'm expressing myself well here, because I don't want to come across as critical of people and what their practices are. But, I think that's why there's some concern about, even outside of Hinduism here, about the way in which some of these kind of more intense practices that bring up these very intense powers connected with Shakti can be used in a way that might actually end up being harmful to the person, because they're not really receiving a proper initiation, or they're not receiving a proper, they're not working with a proper master or an expert. Some things can be self-taught, other things can't. Okay. So anyway, that's enough of my soapbox for this week. I want to thank you all for listening. Hope you had a wonderful and prosperous New Year. If you would like to, all my work is on Chthonia.net, including the podcasts, my publications, and Scholars of the Borderland, which is my school. Although, stay tuned, I might be moving Scholars of the Borderland elsewhere, but right now this is where it lies. And also, if you wish to contribute to my Patreon, I have patreon.com/Chthonia. And I have the Chthonia podcast on social media. It's Chthonia Podcast, one word on Twitter and Instagram, 2 words on Facebook, and just Chthonia on YouTube. Thanks so much again for listening, and until next time.